Hello and good evening to everybody who's there to our first Quodlibet in 2023. The subject actually concerns all of us, and I'm sure that we will have a wonderful discussion today. Historically informed performance versus grammophonically informed performance. We're all listening to CDs, Spotify, YouTube, whatever media. And the question is how much or is there any influence at all to our interpretation? That's we would like to discuss tonight. First of all, I would like to introduce the team from the ASC. We have our chief executive who's not there now, I don't see him, Stefan Gies, and the event manager and coordinator, Sara Primitera. Who makes everything possible what we do here online. That's fantastic. Thanks, Sarah. And the so-called task force early music. These are Claire Michon from Poitiers. This is Kelly Landerkin from Basel. Our chairman, Isaac Alonso de Molina from Den Haag. And my name is Anton Steck from Grossingen, Germany. Now, for tonight, I'm very glad to introduce to you a wonderful colleague from London, Professor Daniel Leech-Wilkinson. Oh. Hi, Dan. Thanks so much for being with us. This is going to be a very nice discussion tonight, I think. Let's do the order. What we go. Daniel will do a little introduction at the beginning, and then after that we will discuss together. But of course, we want to know who is on the other side, who are all the guests and people who are there. So we want to do a little round of introduction to give you the possibility to just say your name, the institution, and the city. I see we're not so many. Last time we were 25 or 30 or something. So, but still keep it a little bit short. Name, institution, and city. And just put on your microphones, and we just try if you just speak. Maybe not all at once. Thanks. Oh, no, I forgot. Hi, there is Aurea. I want to first of all, we have a guest tonight we didn't expect yesterday. Aurea Dominguez. She's a bassoon player, and she will maybe also introduce herself quickly later. She's a musician, a bassoon player, as far as I understood, right? Bassoon player and a musicologist, and she's a specialist in gramophones. So that is very interesting. So I guess you will have some comments on that tonight. So can we start with an introduction round? Please, Natalie.
Hello, I'm Natalie, and I'm a student in Trossingen Music Academy, and I'm happy to hear all the information this evening, and yeah, I will enjoy it. Thank you.
Just the next one. Carolina.
I suppose that's me. Good morning. My name is Carolina Sanna. I am a student of Schola Cantorum. I study organ, and I'm also doing PhD in Music Academy in Wrocław. And my topic is about interpretation of Max Reger organ works. And it's a very interesting topic for me, subject of our meeting today, because I also include informations about interpretation, how Reger was playing it its time, and how we can take it and what we can take from it to our performance right now. So
wow.
Thank you so much for this opportunity that I can learn something from a specialist, and and thank you.
Great, thank you. Hilary.
Yes, hello. So I'm Hilary Metzger. I'm a cellist. I'm on the faculty at Paul Aliénor in Poitiers. There I'm the Baroque cello teacher. My specialty for my research is mostly 19th century performance practice, and especially recitative accompaniment, secco-recitative accompaniment in later repertoire.
Wow, very good. Anna.
Hello, I'm Anne Delafosse from Lyon. I teach medieval music. I switch between Deutsch and English. So, medieval music for singers in Lyon, and I head of early music department. I'm very, very happy to join the Quodlibet for the first time.
Great, thanks so much. Maria.
Hi, I'm Maria. I'm a cello student in Utrecht, in the Netherlands. And yeah, I mean, my master's is about modern cello, but I'm more focused now in historical performance practice in the 19th century. And also...
Your microphone is off now. Yeah. Okay, are you finished? Okay. Martina, there was a connection problem. Martina?
Yes, you won't get my image because I'm recovering, so it's not worth. I'm from the Schola Cantorum, member of the research department, and I got the invitation from Kelly and was so interested that I'm here now. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Gertruda?
Yes, hello. I studied in Schola Cantorum, but now I'm back in my homeland in Latvia, and I work in Riga Music Academy in early music department. I play harpsichord and I work as a accompanist in Riga.
Thank you. Wow. Konstantin? You should.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm Konstantin, and I study in Den Haag. I'm in the bachelor of my transversal studies. Yes.
Okay.
And I'm the second time here.
Okay, thank you. And I have a last one, which Zoom user, I have no name there. I don't know. There's one missing who's online, so how can we get access to that? I don't know. Okay, no.
Maybe just doesn't want to speak. Maybe.
Yep, that's another possibility. That's so. Thank you very much. I would give the word now to Dan, and we're very happy that you're here. Thank you.
Well, it's wonderful for me. I'm so grateful and honoured to be asked to speak to you and spread some of my crazy ideas. And I think probably the first thing for me to do is to share my screen, because I've got a few pictures, charts and things. So tell me if you can see that, and nothing else, ideally.
Yes.
Perfectly.
Great. So what I'd like to do in this short introduction is to make 3 points. I make them quite briefly, I hope, all being well. But you can find the larger context for them in my online book, Challenging Performance, Classical Music Performance Norms and How to Escape Them. It's free to read online, and it's quite easy to navigate. Just put the mouse over the book at the top left, and you'll get the menus, a menu for each chapter. It's got 4 parts. The first introductory, the second one is about policing performance, which includes things like teaching at various stages and criticism and ethical obligations, who you have obligations to. And also it concerns the problems that affect performers as a result of all this policing, particularly the ill health that comes from it. The third part is about how to be more creative which has got lots of sound examples, video examples of transgressive performances, let's call them. But there's also, you see at the bottom of the main menu, there's a summary, which, if you don't want to read the whole book, contains as bullet points every point that I make in the book, about 120 or something like that. And so you can just read that if you want to. And then there are links at the end of each of those bullet points to the chapters where explanations are provided. So that's the book. And that's where you can go to find out more about these ideas. So the first point I want to make is this: listen to early recordings. Let me just backtrack a little bit. You can't read a score without imagining a performance. So performance style is always shaping ideas about music, and that includes ideas about composers, compositions, music history, music theory, and of course, performance itself. All of this thought is shaped by assumptions about the way particular scores sound in performance. And recordings spread assumptions about performance style just as much as teaching does, or going to concerts. You could try to remove recordings, but teaching in concerts would still be shaped by the same assumptions we hear on record. Treatises and textbooks from the past are also read with particular performance styles in mind. Whether you're reading about bowing or fingering or ornamentations or whatever it is, the way you imagine those sounding depends on the performance style you're used to hearing in that music. We just cannot escape assumptions about performance style. And they are always of today, our assumptions, and they are always unnecessarily limited. I say unnecessarily limited because there are so many other ways that performance styles can work, so many more ways than we use or than we have ever heard. Recordings are, without any doubt, I argue, the most powerful evidence we have that most of what we believe about past performance, about the necessity of present performance, is wrong. You only have to listen to early recordings from 100, 120 years ago to realize that performance changes more and more quickly than we would ever have believed possible. And once you've realized how much it changes, you have to admit that what we currently think is essential to musicianship is not essential at all. Performance could be, has been, and will be quite different. To insist that it has to be as it is now is wrong. Historically, philosophically, ethically wrong. So early recordings teach us essential things about music, about the wide open field of possibilities for convincing performance. They liberate performers. They set them free from dogma, from false belief, from the unnecessarily restrictive teaching and criticizing of performers. Early recordings license performers to experiment, to transgress, to favor diversity and difference. The idea that you would try to discourage students from listening to recordings in principle is therefore horrifying to me, for it would suppress the best evidence we have that music can be far more than we imagine, and that a life in music can be far richer and more artistically varied and creative than it often is at the moment. It's essential, though, not to listen only to recent recordings, and never to listen, or indeed to go to concerts or masterclasses, just to find out the proper way to play a score. That's damaging to imagination and to an exciting artistic practice. Second point, forget about works. Almost all the problems we have in thinking clearly about classical music come from the work myth. Musicians are trained to believe that a score represents a work, that's to say, a composition with a fixed identity that must be sounded. They're brought up from childhood to believe this, partly because that makes it easier to teach and police performance, and partly because it makes it easier and cheaper to perform, in that it saves much of the imaginative work we would otherwise have to do, and most of the expensive discussion we would have to have with our co-performers in order to decide how to play or sing a score. But the work myth also seems to make sense because, at the moment, performances are so similar that people believe that that is how a score must sound. They simply assume that it will have and must have forever the identity that it has at the moment, every time you hear it. This allows there to seem to be a work, something unchanging. But it's not a work, it's only a performance practice. That practice has changed hugely, is always changing, and as it changes, so the identity of the composition changes, and the identity of the composer changes with it. When so much about the identity of a composition changes, it is thoroughly misleading to talk about the work. Nothing about music is that fixed. There are scores and performances starting from those scores. I choose my words very carefully here. Performances starting from those scores. And there are experiences of those performances. And it's those experiences that are the music. Music is an experience, not a thing. In this chain of transmission on your screen, every step except the physical score is personal, individual, variable, and it becomes more personal the nearer you get to the musics that are made in the minds of the listeners, including, of course, the performing listeners. There is no work anywhere in this process. The work is a concept that is entirely invented for the purpose of copyright and then for controlling performers and experiences. All this should be easier to see with early music, where there's no continuous performance story and less agreed performance practice, except temporarily and within in-groups. With early music, it's easier to see that there's nothing there but a score. That's most obvious, of course, with medieval music, where the gap between them and us is widest. But it's just as true of recent music. Much of early music research and teaching and writing is about trying to make works out of these scores by making performance practices that must belong with them. It's about trying to make identities for scores that will have the status of works. But rather than trying to make early music like high classical music, we should be doing exactly the opposite, trying to make late classical scores as open, as unencumbered by tradition as medieval scores. The beauty of all this, if we want to benefit from it, is that it's much easier in early music to accept that there is no work and that performers are ethically free to do what they like. It's true of all classical music, but at least it's easier to operate here. And it is clear that many early music performers now know this and are using it to great effect. performers of later repertoire have further to go to catch up with you. So here's my take-home message. Stop trying to get lost performance styles out of treatises and writings from the past. You'll never do it. Only recordings offer enough evidence to recreate past sounds and styles. And so we can only remake sounds and styles from the late 19th century onwards. It's excellent for treatises to give us ideas, but they become our ideas. We mustn't pretend that they're theirs, or let anyone insist that they ought to be. We cannot recreate until we have recordings. So the earliest recordings are the most important evidence we have that music is always changing its identity. Every performance student needs to listen to them so as to understand that performance is always new and always now. And therefore it's right and good to aim, to intend, to try with all one's power to make new performance styles. Which leads finally to my third point. Refuse rules. There is only one rule, that our job is to make a persuasive musical experience for as many listeners as we can. Create. We're entitled to act as creative artists, not as historians or servants or worshippers at the shrine of a long dead composer's imagined wishes. Make music. It's ours to make. Thanks.
Wow, thank you, thank you, Dan. This was wonderful, and a lot of, I guess, a lot of. Oh yeah, there's some more people coming. Very good. A lot of people will have questions, I guess, or comments on that. Shall we start the round? Who wants to? I just can see my image now and Dan's. Do we have some people who want to say to refer to that? Oh, it's the start of the discussion as always.
Or we can just have a discussion about anything you like.
Yeah, you. Kelly.
Thank you so much. This is so interesting and such a fresh perspective, and it kind of reminds us of why we're musicians in the first place. You've what do you say? Beat the drum for the use of recordings, and this is quite special because I've started to reestablish their balance in my musical work. I had a discussion years ago with Benjamin Bagby, and because you brought in medieval, let's roll with it just for a minute. Benjamin Bagby working on unwritten repertoires of the 9th and 10th centuries, and how he found an instrument. It was reconstructed for him, a lyre. And then the question was, how did you decide what to do with the performance of something along the lines of his Beowulf? And he said, well, I saw in some manuscript sources that that the singer is often accompanied by some kind of an instrument. So I took the instrument that I thought was appropriate, I had it reconstructed and strung, and then I said, what can it do? Let's take it out for a ride and see what this instrument does. And this becomes the basis for an interpretation, for an accompaniment to a text and a melody. And here's my point. This is a bit long-winded, but my point is his imagining of what he did with that instrument becomes so influential, because then that's what that style sounds like if Ben Bagby does it. And then I don't even know it because I was a young student, you know, a few generations ago. And I thought that's how you do it. And for me to roll back the layers of interpretation that I had assumed was appropriate, it took me a lot more time than to learn it the way that he showed me was appropriate.
Yeah, there are two sides to this, aren't there? I mean, on the one hand, if somebody manages to make a new performance style and it's persuasive, then there's every reason for other people to work with it and to make more performances, maybe of different things that are also persuasive. It's absolutely no reason not to do that. But I suppose at the same time, one wants to have an ear open for the possibility of making a different performance style and finding other ways of being persuasive. And I don't see why you can't do both, you know? I mean, why not develop something somebody else has done, but or alternatively, or somebody else, or you at a different moment, also make something new and just make the whole picture richer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think both are absolutely fine, as long as we're always making something new and not just copying a performance.
That's the big point, is that we need to have more than one influence.
Yeah.
And then the plethora, the community of different performance possibilities allows maybe a wider context. Thank you so much for your reaction.
I think it's Hillary, as far as I can see.
Hello. Thank you so much for that talk. I really enjoyed it, and to remind us about the importance of these early recordings, something that I study often in my own work. And not just that, but also the idea that we refuse rules and we're against this idea of works or the canon. I really loved it. I just want to share some ideas. I have done early recordings, made wax cylinders myself, and practiced that way. And so I know the experience of playing one way and then hearing it back, and what I hear, at least initially, seems nothing like what I thought I played. So I just think there's one issue we should perhaps address, that some of these early recordings, in terms of the technology, one did have to play a certain way. I mean, I realize the bow has to be on the string. It has to be rather loud all the time for anything to kind of come across on this. This is pre-microphone even. I mean, on the horn, I'm talking. Okay, that's one thing I wanted to raise. And another question, in terms of, you were contrasting the use of text, or how we study text, and that that the idea that recordings should always be privileged as a source of historical awareness. I would personally argue that perhaps it's a bit more nuanced than that. As someone who makes a lot of recordings in the métier, I mean, so much of the time, what ends up on that CD is a compromise, or is just the luck of the draw, or no one was really happy with it, but no one was against it, so it kind of made its way there. Or we didn't have many takes, and they had even fewer options back then. What I think these texts give us is an idea of how they taught, or what their rules were. And of course they were going against the rules, and it's fascinating to see how and in what ways. But I think it's the combination, or the interplay, or how they contradict one another, that is really so fascinating, or potentially interesting. Anyway, I was wondering if you had any reactions to either of those comments.
Yes, I do. I tell you, taking the second one first, I tell you why I'm so militant about recordings being better evidence than text.
Okay.
It's because I've compared the teaching books by people who made early recordings, people who wrote books, but also made recordings. And when you read what they say, there is no way that you would ever imagine the sounds that they make when they make a recording. It's just incomprehensibly different from anything you would imagine reading those words. And so I assume that must be just as true for any teaching book or any treatise from any period. It's a sort of, it's a shame, but
Well,
that's why I think without recordings, there's just not enough
no,
there.
you're right. Yes, yes, absolutely. Just if I can follow up on that point, and I do want to know your reaction to my first one.
Sure.
I study the same thing, and I think that when we examine their language, we can see in what cases it's going to agree and in what cases it's going to diverge. Because it's the same thing today. If I'm teaching my children about traffic rules, I say, we never cross the street when the light is red. It's important to know that rule if we're going to understand traffic. But in reality, I cross the street all the time when it's red. However, if I were to base the knowledge of traffic rules only on my behavior, if someone from Mars is watching it and they're only observing my behavior, they're missing a crucial issue about traffic rules. And we need to know that the light is red means something. We need both. We need the behavior and we need the written rule. Even when they contradict, is what I feel. And I feel there are tones of rhetoric that can indicate when they're likely to contradict and when they're likely to coincide with a performance. But I completely agree with you that if I have to choose, I go with the recording. There's no question about it. And they're so wonderfully touching and real and visceral and exciting in a way that texts rarely are. So I'm absolutely with you on that point.
I love your analogy because it places us as the people from Mars. And I think that's exactly what we are when we're faced with early music.
Yes. And did you have any comments to my reaction when I made recordings with older technology, that what I heard on the wax cylinder was at least not what I thought I was playing? No, and in fairness, they recorded me digitally too. This was at the Guildhall in a research day. So you can hear the digital recording and you can hear the wax cylinder recording. So it's not just my subjective feelings on the matter. It's not completely, shall we say.
No, absolutely not. There've been, and there still are at the moment, some really interesting projects using early recording equipment and comparing the results. And they're very helpful. But I think as a general principle, anybody who's studying early recordings they're sort of obliged, really. It's basic musicological technique, if I can put it that way, to know really quite a lot about the early technology, so that you can know what you can rely on in the sound you're hearing and what you can't rely on.
Right.
I think we need to know that, and it probably ought to be taught in universities and conservatoires alongside the use of early recordings. You really need to know that. I agree with you about that.
Right. Well, thank you again. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much
for your corrections and adjustments.
Oh, well, no, it's not correction.
No,
it's just
fair enough.
Whatever. Thank you.
I like to take the simple and extreme view just to get the discussion going.
Yes.
Thank you, Hilary. That was a very interesting aspect. Do we have other questions or comments? Or there's one from Teresa. Hi. You have to set on your microphone, please. Yeah.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Hello. One question, because of course I was a little bit later, so I couldn't listen to your all the presentation, but the moments I've heard was absolutely fantastic. And thank you very much. It was so refreshing and very interesting. But only one thing about the recordings, because in many cases, of course, I agree with this stuff of listening to the recordings, especially the old, very, very old one. But the modern one is some kind of me. If the recordings are real concert music situation, mostly not, because the recordings are made, from cutted pieces, fragments. Does the recording, which is absolutely perfect, it's the real, how to say it? Sorry, my English.
No, it's
witness. Is it a real witness about this? What we want to hear, to listen to? It's just I'm always thinking about it.
You're quite right that they are kind of artificial. They're manufactured. But on the other hand, they have to sound like performances because otherwise nobody would buy them. It's a two-way thing, isn't it? That people have argued very convincingly. I think that people have started to play more and more like recordings, which is perhaps unfortunate. But you know, it's a kind of a mutually persuasive relationship, I think. Recordings try to persuade us that they're like performances, and performers try to persuade us that they're as good as recordings. It's not a terribly healthy relationship, perhaps, in that sense.
Because what I was, if I could, sorry if I interrupt you, but it was like when I was reading the diaries by Arthur Rubinstein, what he read about recordings. It goes both ways, because he said when I started recordings, I had to start to practice, because then after the first recordings, I realized how bad I play, how many mistakes I make, which I played I play wrong keys. And well, he did it absolutely, played absolutely fantastic, but he played always with a lot of mistakes during his whole life, and didn't, for me, it was not a problem at all, because the music was anyway, he made music.
Yeah.
So, and now we are going to our aim is to make the recordings absolutely faultless, on the absolutely perfect way. And sometimes, for me, many recordings kill the music. The real, what Hilary said about this, making like having this fun and so on. So sorry that I have a lot of thoughts, not like a lot of ideas about it.
Let's hear them. That's a great point. Yeah, we should get more comfortable with wrong notes again, don't you think? I mean, the wrong notes are fine as long as they're good wrong notes, as long as they're played in the right way. Yes, it's been very unhealthy getting rid of wrong notes.
Teresa, thank you very much. Do you want to add something? Claire.
Yes, on that topic, I would be very happy to hear some students who are there, how they use recordings. Do they use early recordings? What do they think of current nowadays recordings? And this question of editing and perfection. Well, if some students dare to speak, I would be very happy.
Yeah, me too.
I see Konstantin. Thank you, Claire. That is great. Konstantin? Hoya?
Yes. I mean, I kind of use recordings in that sense that I always use them to argue for for a real romantic performance practice of romantical music, and not this Karl Richter 50s, 60s Mengelberg romanticism idea, and just to fight for things like more glissando here, and but also adding embellishments here and there. And I'm now playing a piece by Beethoven, and I add trills where there are no trills written. So very sacrilegious in a Beethoven piece, I guess. Or I'm on very these typical emphatic thirds and or like the typical intervals that are very emphatic, and they are the place for a glissando. And no one is anymore making a glissando. We just somehow giving them the weight. But so, yeah, and on the other hand, of course, it also shapes us so strong. And I actually share the experience of Rubinstein that I just made a concert 2 weeks ago, and someone recorded it with a phone. And in the ensemble, we were doing it. It was actually a service, and we were doing it from the organ loft and doing it with choir stand and saxophons and a big ensemble. And up there, it was extremely loud, and that must have somehow eliminated insecureness, not being together, all these little things we were not hearing really upstairs, but in the recording downstairs you then heard them. So it's somehow also the balance, of course, is then in a recording way different than you experienced it.
Thank you, Konstantin. Yeah, this is always the problem with mobile phone recordings, and the question is, if you listen to a recording from a concert of a live performance, and sometimes you heard it and listen to it later, and you have two completely different worlds. That's sometimes what it is. Dan, what do you think?
I was particularly interested in your remarks about Glissandi, because we could do with a lot more of that. You know, there's evidence for that even already in the 18th century, and probably before that. It may only have been removed in the 20th, possibly. So one of the things I would very much like to see is people in early music using a lot more portamento. But the other thing that reminded me of something else, which we really need to face up to, something you can learn from early recordings. It's a huge subject. We mustn't get too far into it now, but the fact that people didn't necessarily regard playing together as playing in synchronization. As one of my research students makes that really interesting distinction, I think. You can play together without the notes of chords coming at the same moment. And in the early 20th century, the late 19th century, it was perfectly normal for parts not to synchronize in time, even though the performers were working extremely carefully together. And we just can't get our heads around that idea yet. But there's enormous potential in there for new kinds of expressivity, I think. So I'd love to see more students experimenting with that.
That's very true, and that's very important. Yeah. Konstantin, are you fine with this? Or?
No, I actually was just saying, actually here in our school, I feel the thing with Glissandi is quite evident. So we learn already in our first year, we are learning all the French ornamentation from Monteclair. And the description that he gives, even that I'm not knowing French, but how he's writing it, is suggesting nothing else than chute de voix on a six, or on even bigger intervals, and pot de voix or tierce coulées being glissandi, and also then people always say the instruments are imitating the voice, and then they mean something like, yeah, the sound. And no, I mean, or Quantz writes, you should listen to good singers, or you should play as you like a good singer. And he's not meaning technical things or aesthetics of sounds. He really means the character and the musicality that you learned through the singing before you started playing instruments in boys choirs everywhere, and so on. And then, like, I think it's then we had it in the master class. It's Tromlitz who says, yeah, nowadays the people only do two or three times in a movement. They do it glissandi, and before they did it everywhere. And luckily, this has been was passing, and probably he was meaning that the people were doing Quodlibet was really strong still on the flute by using glissandi, and of course it's still like then in Fürsten now you have even the fingering charts how to do glissando on the flute, and I've never heard or a romantic flute CD even by early musicians like Bart Kuiken or anyone that uses glissando. So we know it, but I think we need like the encouragement to do it.
That's right. There are several things we know that nobody will do because they're too shocking. Well, I'm all for being shocking.
Thank you, Konstantin.
You can make great music by doing it, of course.
That's true. Thank you, Konstantin, for this comment.
Yep.
So we go on with Aurea, sorry.
Hi. Well, thank you very much for this nice discussion. I'm really enjoying it. And more than a comment, I have a question, because you point out a few times through the speak that we really have to go back and listen to recordings. It's very important that we look into the technology of these machines, and that when we listen to this music, we react because we are not used to how they sounded, and etc., etc. So my question is a very simple and complicated question at the same time. It's like, how do you suggest that we listen to early recordings, and how do you suggest that we talking to others or teaching or whatever, that we train ourselves to listen to recordings? Because obviously these people, they were not recording for us to listen. I mean, they were not making a recording thinking that somebody 100 years later is going to record. The same that when you're talking about the treatise, if we have problems understanding the treatises, because they were not written for us, they were written for 300-year-old people studying with them. So that's why sometimes we really have to make an abstraction and really get to know the period. So now in the 21st century, what would you say, like, how do I listen to early recordings? What should I look for? What should I don't know. Thank you.
Perhaps this is too simplistic an answer, but I think it's like everything in music, everything I can think of in music. If you hear it enough, you get used to it and it makes sense. I mean, expert musicians only do things that make sense to them. And if they make sense to them, there's a good chance that they're capable of making sense to anybody else once they've got used to the style. So I think we're capable of making good sense of any performance style, however strange, that anybody has made with success in the past. And I don't think it's more complicated than that. I'm not sure that I would want to sort of write down a list of things that you need to know or do in order to make musical sense of an early recording. Even though, as I said earlier, of course, it's good to have a lot of understanding of the technology in order to do research with them. But just to understand them as musical experiences, I think all you need to do is listen reasonably, repeatedly. Yes, not obsessively, but repeatedly, so that it becomes familiar.
Yeah, I mean, and at a certain point, I agree on that, but isn't it a little bit simplistic? Isn't it like when we were starting with early music, they were saying, here, a harpsichord, it is going to teach you how to play. And then later we start reading books and being a little bit more deeper into the thing, and we understand, okay, the instrument is not going to teach us. Of course, we need an instrument to learn how to play it, and there are a lot of things that you can only understand when you are playing a early instrument, and okay, got strings, they work like that. You cannot really operate the same way. But still, you need to study performance practice in order to refine your technique, so to speak. So what I'm looking for is, of course, the first step is to just listen a lot of music and get used to so it doesn't sound weird. I completely agree. But I don't know, I hope or I think that there is much more on that. I think there is some ways that we should really, I don't know, try to understand the different, because there was a lot of variety, there was a lot of ways of playing, not even in schools, but a lot of, even in one person making the different recordings through their lives, there are many differences, even if it's the same person. So what can we study, how can we study all this so it makes sense and it's not just like, here, a viola, play it.
Well, I'm a bit resistant to the idea that the first people who played modern harpsichords didn't really quite know how to make music with them. I mean, they didn't know how to make the music that we make with them, but they made music that made sense to them. So, you know, if I'm listening to, I don't know, Landowska or somebody, it may not be the kind of music making I associate with harpsichord, with informed harpsichord playing at the moment. But I think in its own time and in its own terms, it was pretty successful. So I'm very open to the idea that musicians simply find ways of making instruments work for them, even if they're not the ways that later musicians think are the best ways, because that concept of what's best is always changing.
Yes, no, of course, and there is no one way of playing, and I don't think Landowska is the best example for, I mean, she didn't follow the early music trend. I mean, she even has some quotes saying like, well, if Pergolesi listens to me playing and doesn't like it, he's dead, he can stay there in the grave, yeah, which I love it, and I really love Landowska in that way, but I don't know, my general feeling in general is this, with these sound studies, is that we are somehow at the beginning, well, not at the beginning, because there are a lot of things have been going on since, I don't know, maybe the 80s or something, but there is still much more, and I think we should really get a little bit more deep into this kind of research and not be just listening and playing a little bit like new hippie way. But it's just my opinion. So anyway, thank you very much for.
I quite agree. The closer one looks and reads and listens, and the more experimentation one does, the more good ideas one has.
Thank you, Aurea. Thank you so much. Are you? Yeah. Okay. Carolina, please.
Yeah, I just answering the question that was asked before, because I'm as a student, to be completely honest, I don't listen so much recordings of early music. Maybe it's because I'm organist, and for me, I just cannot stand organ on the CD. Like for me, organ music is like the instrument is also the acoustic. It's like the whole instrument are not only pipes and the keyboards and pedal board, but the whole architecture where it's performed. And about the recordings of early music, what for me is important, if I cannot find some sources like from tablatures of that is not so popular, the recordings helps me to understand which kind of music contain some tablatures. So I think that recordings are helpful in that kind of cases where we don't have access to some sources, and then we have access to the recording that is on some common platform, and it's available for many people. And yeah, I just want to share this thought that it's really, I think, helpful when the performance exists, and then if I try to don't take it for me, like I try to don't be suggested by other interpretations, and this is what I also did like in the past. So I always try to just see the scores and then see what I can create out of it. but then at some point, it's also nice to hear how others hear the same music, and yeah, just this.
Where do you go for your ideas about Reger, about historic performance of Reger, or perhaps
Yeah, right now I'm in the point that I'm analyzing when the recordings, because that's the main point for me. We cannot go so much into which mood he had in the moment that he was performing. We have letters of him, and we can just assume that he was not so happy to perform and to make these recordings. But like, he was paid and he agreed to do it. He also recorded the easiest pieces, and we could judge right now that it's not the best performance that we would expect after a composer playing his piece. And then, of course, I try to analyze how is that working, because I had no idea how it was created. And then I discovered it. Somebody discovered. I just discovered it for me that the part of the pedal comes a little bit later, because the dots were doing on a special way produced by Welte company, and this influenced also the listening of the performance. So right now, my point is that the recordings of this exist, and that we shouldn't copy it as it is, of course, because I think that every day we can play the same toccata in different ways and with different emotions. But I think that what is important, that there are always like the structure, which gives the harmony, gives emotions, and gives the corpse in which we can then create our interpretation. So the point is, my point, to don't copy what Reger is doing. I try to analyze what we have right now with what we are dealing with, and and just consider that maybe he wanted that it's not perfect, but we just simply cannot know.
Composers' recordings are interesting and often puzzling, aren't they? Because it's so hard to know whether the composer's understanding of a piece was just so utterly different from our own, or whether they just weren't so good as performers. I mean, it's often a problem. There's always a tendency to assume that the composer was a composer and not so much a performer. I'm not sure how much true that is with organists. You know, I mean, they're generally pretty fine performers too. So yeah, but composers' recordings are always particularly challenging, because we want to give them the ultimate authority, and yet, you know, they're just human performers like everybody else. In fact, that's the whole problem with composers, that, you know, the longer they've been gone, the more they become gods and the less they become humans. But, you know, when we know composers, if you know composers, you know that they're not really gods. They may be delightful.
And especially in that case, that when I'm writing about Reger, I didn't know which kind of person, which kind of character he was, and right now, if I would meet him, I might not like him, but I like him.
Well, yeah, I mean, that music is quite forbidding, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, well, we mustn't get into a discussion about Reger's organ music.
And his playing.
Off topic.
And his playing. I mean,
you see, I've not heard those recordings. I didn't know there were any, I'm ashamed to say. So now I've got to go and listen to them.
They're in Switzerland, in the Sieben. In Sieben is the Museum of Music, Automat and Instruments. And there is the organ that they have this music rose, where it's also music of Max Reger by Max Reger. But there are also music rose, the performance of Bach, performed by French organists from 20th century. So yeah,
this is sounding very familiar. I think I'd just forgotten, but yeah, interesting.
So thank you very much, Carolina. And Kelly was the next, and either Konstantin or I thought Hillary was first, but maybe Sarah, you have
No, is that I cannot spotlight Hilary because she has not her camera on, so she can.
Okay.
If she yeah. Now I can do it.
Doesn't matter. So we start with Kelly's.
It's actually mostly just a reaction to what a few things that Carolina just said. And it's this idea of recording as source. And I had mentioned to Dan, I think in an email, that we had a conference recently at the Schola where a student rather offhandedly mentioned that she considered recordings, whether historical or contemporary, to be sources just as important as written historical documents for her own interpretation of music. And my question becomes, who is the authority? Who is influencing me? What are my criteria for pulling those influences apart? And how difficult is it for me as a listener or as an artist myself to separate myself from the visceral experience of a performance that I've just heard? It becomes, reading a source is so much farther away from me as an emotional being than a performance. So I guess I'm just curious. I think this is a really interesting point. It had never occurred to me that I think the historical recordings, when of their time or shortly after their time, are a super important historical document. But the farther we get away from that comes this question of balance and discernment. So I don't know if anybody has a reaction to that. That's just what I was thinking when listening to Carolina's interesting comments.
Very good, Kelly. Thank you. Claire, do you want to react on that?
Yes, because my question was my previous question about how do the students use recordings is also linked to the current recordings we have that are very much influenced by the wish of perfection that the labels and the audience are asking for. And so what the students can get, maybe a bit less now that artists put their recordings, their own recordings on social networks, but the recordings from labels and the commercial ones have a specific way of, or a type of perfection to be together on the beat, etc. And I'm not sure that all students are able to put enough distance to that. So I'm a little bit like Kelly. So like when you read sources, there is a distance. It's easier to put a distance there, but I agree that we have also ways of reading sources that influence. And I remember some about recordings. I remember some students listening to Franz Brugge and saying, well, but he doesn't play in tune. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You're listening to that when, yes, current recorder students say, well, it's not that perfect. But that's a reaction. I don't have any questions.
Thank you, Claire. So Dan, you want to say something on that, or shall we go on with Konstantin? What do you think?
No, let's go on. I mean, because we all agree really that this striving for perfection is a problem. But perhaps none of us really knows how to escape it.
That's true. So, Konstantin.
Yes. Actually, thank you that you gave me just the term the striving for perfection. And actually, I had just came to my mind that we are somehow these discussions are always striving for a performance, actually. What we are trying to get out of is a different way how we perform our music, how the product that comes out of us, the performance, how we change it. And that way, I thought actually the most historical thing we can do, the most early music thing, is to just listen to these recordings and to do nothing. Because we also don't have to replicate them, because no one would have been replicating them. And therefore, I actually would suggest, it's just because I'm at the moment, literally these days, I'm reading through it, is that we have to recreate something else than just the product. And that might be our process of becoming a musician. And I actually see it now that so many times in my studies, when we were talking about quants, about the chapters on how to play the adagio, how to play this, how to play the allegro. We were never talking about, or having a whole masterclass once about, how to do the embouchure. How is the order of the fingers? How is, or now I'm working on this chapter, what to take care of when you are practicing. So, and I mean, this book is so thick that literally in this book, you have a tutor teaching to you, or trying to do it somehow like that. He's still writing, yes, actually a real life tutor. A teacher is necessary. At the same time, he also says, when your teacher is teaching you nonsense, then this book can help you to eliminate the nonsense. So what we actually should recreate, and now I'm like someone who is also in this chat once said, like, have you met any Baroque musician? Anyone doing Baroque music? And he said, I didn't, because they are all dead. So we are contemporary musicians. And he said, we are contemporary musicians. So the approach might be, or the best approach just might be to try to recreate an idea of how it would be, or what would Quantz do according to his book when he would be my teacher. And he actually gives that way very strict instructions of teacher has to be there from the beginning and change this in the flute technique and take care about this mistake not happening. So what in that sense could like recordings actually bring to us? I wonder, like, are there any recordings, for example, about teachings, about people becoming a musician, building what they really like? I mean, sometimes it was used as an excuse in the sense of, yeah, in the end, it's always good taste. And people translated it kind of to play as you think. And then not seeing, yeah, but you have to educate your good taste. Like, you cannot drill anywhere. You have to know where to drill and have to have learned it from the musicians that are already dead. So
that's a good point, Konstantin. Great. Dan, do you want to reply on that?
Well,
there's many questions actually.
The more you say, the more go back to thinking about Quantz after rather a long time away, the more he sounds to me like a sort of classic modern masterclass tutor, who of the worst kind, who wants you to play just like they do. You know, I mean, isn't that what these books are for? To tell you how to play like that? I don't know. Is that what we want? I mean, the other way of going about this is, I'm sorry to be really outrageous, but the other way to go about this is to put Quantz back on the shelf and start to try to make a completely different way of playing one's instrument. And I think that would be, you know, I mean, that would be perhaps more exciting. The other thing I wanted to pick up, something you said right at the beginning when you were speaking, Konstantin, about copying recordings. And oddly enough, copying the earliest recordings, the ones that are most different from the way we make music, copying those can be an incredibly rich and interesting experience, because you learn different ways of touching the instrument, different ways of using it. You have to, otherwise there's no way you can make the sounds that they made. And so I'm, oddly enough, although, you know, I might agree with many teachers in saying don't copy recordings, when it comes to early recordings, I think it's actually very valuable, though incredibly difficult.
That's true. Wow. Okay, Konstantin, fine. So we go on with Hilary.
Yes, I just wanted to respond to this idea of reactions to recordings from 2 points of view. There was one person who said, what should I listen for on recordings? And I would argue that there are certain themes that people do listen for or talk about: dislocation or not being together, tempo rubato, the use of glissandi, the lack of vibrato or in voices, whatever. These themes come back a lot. But what would really be refreshing is find what touches you. What are you hearing on this? Or what sounds different, moving, interesting to you? So I would say use this like, as you were saying, Dan, to how we explore new ways, new creative ways, use these documents and come up with different ideas, different ways that it touches you. But I wanted to question the students about auto recordings as a practice tool, or recordings as a way of getting better. One thing that these early people say, as Rubinstein said, apparently, oh my gosh, is that really the way I sound? And we forget in this day of recordings that for many of these early recordings, they'd never heard themselves play, not on their phones, not on anything. This was it. And as with our own voices, the first time you hear yourself play, it is such a shock, and usually an unfavorable one. And I was wondering to what extent students use recordings in their practice, use recordings as a pedagogical tool, this idea of reacting to recordings.
Thank you, Hilary. Dan, do you want to reply, or shall we go on with?
I think we need some of the students here to tell us.
Yes.
If they wouldn't mind.
We have Isaac also in the line, so the students could now think of a question or something or a comment on that, and I would like to ask Isaac.
Yeah, hello, good evening to everyone. And it is really fantastic to hear all these ideas. We'll go a little bit all over the place in any case, which is also nice and beautiful and fantastic. Like those early recordings also, sometimes they play all over the place. Yeah, so we're a little bit doing that also, which is very good. I was thinking, just because of my own interest there, what about the writings of Professor Leech-Wilkinson, I was listening to everyone speaking and still thinking a little bit more about the ontological part. Yeah, what is music? What is a piece? What is a work? I find myself many times saying there is no piece. There is no piece in my lessons. There is no work. Also, works do not exist, or chords do not exist. This is a favorite of my students. Harmony does not exist. It's all counterpoint actually, and this sort of things. Yeah, so a work does not exist. Work happens only in the moment when it is being played, and in the moment it is being experienced. Also, if you want to put it also from the other side, from the part of view, from the point of view of the listener, if you want, or receiver somehow. But then at the same time, this happens in both aspects, in the work itself. So a little bit with the idea of the composition, and in the recording itself. The recording itself is again another thing that it is artificial, like some people were saying that you miss so many things. Like Carolina was talking about the space. Yeah, I many times I also talk about this in my classes, that the material with which a musician is working is not sound but air actually. That is what I try to because it changes completely the way people play. Maybe it's just a metaphor. Maybe it's just not true, but it's a nice metaphor because actually it's through the air that we touch the ears of other people. Yeah, it's through the air. So it's actually our tool. We're putting air in motion, and we have let's say an immediate tool, which is our voices or our instruments, to put that air in motion. One way of thinking about this, no? And so this whole thing of ontology makes me think again and connect it a little bit with topics that have to do with orality and written culture. Or you were mentioning, Professor, you were mentioning the whole thing of medieval music, which in which world we have like the foremost role for orality. Of course, and we should feel like that, of course, yeah, because then maybe classical music has been in a way let's say, how to put it in a way that is, yeah, the deceiving perception that we can start from the score. But that is just a perception, and it's a deceiving perception. That is what I would say to the topic for now, in any case.
Thank you so much, Isa. And
yeah, I think that's a really important point. I keep saying to people, Western classical music is an oral culture that pretends to be, or pretends to itself to be, a written culture. But yeah, I think any of these analogies, I mean, your analogy, you're getting people to think about dealing with air, you know, whether it's helpful just because it encourages you to reset your mind a little bit, and it gets you out of the sort of groove that you get stuck in your thinking about music, and we always need to do that because it's such an incredibly hard thing to think about. It's very tempting to fall back on cliches in the way we think and talk about it, when really they're never quite right.
That's very true, yes. So I see Carolina once again.
I'm sorry, I just have one question, because this is always what I'm thinking about. When we have CD with some recordings, we also listen this in special situations. Also, our way of thinking what we are doing right now is different than when we are going to the live concert. And I think that it might also influence us and our perception, how we are listening the recordings. And also it might influence what we think about these interpretations. What do you think about it? Is it true, or I think, like, for example, if I have really good recording of some music and I would like to listen it, what is the reason why I want to listen it, and which kind of part of the day? Am I doing this because I needed to analyze it? Am I doing this because I just like this piece and I would like to hear it right now? Or and the different situations with the concerts, we cannot change the date of the concerts, the one that we want to go and watch and listen. And we have also different attitudes in these both situations. Do you think that it influences a lot how we interpret what we are listening, or not so much?
I suppose there are so many factors that influence the experience we have when music is sounding. But in an ideal situation, what happens is that we become so lost in the music, so completely a part of it, that we're not aware of anything else. And in that situation, I don't think it matters whether you're in a concert hall or a cathedral, or whether you're at home or whether you've got your headphones on. If you're completely lost in it, then you're completely in it, you know. I think at that point it all becomes the same experience. But of course it's such a hard experience to achieve, and it doesn't always last very long when you do. But it's the same for performers, of course. Only occasionally do you get so completely lost in what you're doing that it becomes you and you become it. But that is what we're all aiming for, I think.
What comes to my mind right now is like there are some days that I have a lot of things to do, I'm tired, and then I go to the concerts and I'm not listening so active and carefully. But some things are going in my mind automatically. I don't control them. I just hear fagot, hear something else, and so on. So that the idea, I mean, not the idea. I mean, if we would listen to recordings, I think we don't do it if we don't want to do it really. And of course, we can say that it's the same with the concerts. We don't go to the concert if we don't want to go to the concert. But our active listening, I think it might be different in both cases. What do you think?
I don't know. No, I think I think I just want to be so completely lost in it that I don't know where I am, you know? But it's very hard to listen to music, I think. I mean, to really, really listen. And you have to have help from the performance, I think.
I mean, then I sorry, Kelly, I one quick remark on that. What I was, if I listen to music, in the last years, I must admit, I stopped listening to music. Because the time is limited, and I'm so happy to play for myself and to if there's time for making music. What it did after a few years, I realized every time I listen to a recording, I want to completely change it, because I always hate it, unless I play, of course. No, that's also untrue. No, if I play, I also listen to I can't listen to a recording in the first 10 years after I did it, and because I always hate it. And then later I said, okay, it might not have been so bad. But also with other people, I think the most important thing is, but interestingly, the early recordings I never criticized, because I always like this fresh approach, what they have, and this vital way of playing. And I find during the 20th century, the music gets more dead and more conform with some kind of rules I don't understand, or I don't want to hear sometimes. So I stopped listening to actual recordings. But this is just for my part. Carolina, that's fine for you?
Yes, it is. Thank you. I just have like this experience that when I'm going, if I would like to take something like understand like the performance, I'm just thinking, or here is like longer second note that is weaker, but somebody used some kind of tools. And it's really difficult for me to just go and just to don't stop thinking what people are doing or how yeah, that's just the other way of listening to But thank you for your opinions.
Thank you. Thank you. So Kelly and then Natalie.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. This was very inspiring. It keeps going through my mind the omnipresence of music in my life today, whether it's live or recorded or on the radio or on the computer. There's always sound now. And so this is part of the question of focus as well, and concentration and being in it. When we think about the dearth of sound of that musical experience, say 300 years ago, there's no comparison with our experience of music and theirs a few generations ago. Just as the shock of hearing ourselves now, that's what I sounded like, or I thought I was doing much more. All of this was the same. And I just wanted to mention one source, a written source from the 17th century, from a singing school in Rome, where the singing master suggests that his students go every afternoon to the Porte Angelica, where the students can sing off of the against the wall and hear their own echo, and then be able to self-critique. So even then, there were some possibilities. Thank you.
Great, Kelly. Thank you. Okay, then Natalie.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for their wonderful ideas. And I want to come back to the point we made about perfection, because we as students, we are really trained in being perfect in our performance. And actually, we often do not know what perfection is. And I think nowadays we live in a time which technological perfection, you see it, for example, in other fields like astrophotography. If you compare the photos made by Hubble telescope with those who are made nowadays with the Webster telescope, the Webster telescope has very precise technology and a very clear object. But in my opinion, it has less expression. And like for architecture, look how we shape cities and how sober everything is. And coming back to the role and importance of recordings for our musical understanding and development, I think it's important to listen as much as we can also to recordings which do not please. I remember my teacher when I was younger and in the Netherlands, and my teacher said, well, listen to those recordings who do not please your ear that much, because then you will be invited to understand the choices which were made for that performance. And then maybe you accept it or you just refuse, but then you develop your own taste. So I also want to say this about for other students, listen as much as you can to things which maybe are not perfect or do not really meet your expectations, because that's maybe the best way to start thinking and get more inspired and make maybe a good recording. That's maybe my technique. But yeah, I have to listen more to different recordings and maybe also consider the space and location, because sometimes I'm focused too much only on the music and do not consider where it was recorded. And that can also change a lot. So I'm just advocating for the diversity and not for the perfection, which is too canalizing everything. Yeah, that's just my short comment.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Ben?
I think this is such a serious problem, and it's part of the larger problem that above the level of the music student and the young professional, where so much hard work is being done, above that is a level of people who, although they mean well, they have perhaps good intentions, and I'm thinking about critics, agents, managers, concert promoters, all the people who decide whether or not you get booked to give a concert. I'm thinking about all those people. That's the level at which these decisions are made, and at which people get excluded because they're not quite as perfect as somebody else. Now, what I want to know, and I really welcome some ideas about this, though you may think this is not our business, but what I want to know is how we change the way that those people behave. Okay, and I think that this is something that you can only do through activism. Now, we're not used to this idea in music of any sort, and even less in classical music. The idea that you might actually need to go and stand outside a concert hall with a banner saying, "We demand difference," you know. But how do we even open up this discussion at that level with those kinds of people? How do we get them to think about these questions? How do we engage with them? And at somewhere there's a responsibility in the system to start this process, and I have a feeling that that responsibility may lie in the conservatoires. Because I do think that they have some authority and therefore some power to speak to the rest of the music profession and say, look, we do not like the way that you are policing our students and ex-students. We think you need more open minds. We're teaching our students to be more creative, but when they get out to play to you, you are preventing them, you know? So how do we make progress here? And can the conservatoires actually get together? I mean, and this is the perfect organization to think about this in order to you know, draw up a kind of a manifesto for change in that part of the profession that decides who to employ.
That's very true, Dan. That's a very important point. And we were talking of perfection, and I always think we have to offer a musical perfection, but a technical, not necessarily a technical one. Of course, the main goal of all composers was to make a piece, the counterpoint, as perfect as possible, to make the most emotion, the perfect emotion that everybody starts to cry or to laugh or whatever affect you want to have. And so I think our duty is to get our message, the message we want to do, as perfect as possible. I think that's the only chance to, if we say, you know, we had this in the 1970s where period instruments played a little bit out of tune, a little bit like this, a little bit like this. And so, but it was nice. It was period instruments. This part, I think that time is forever gone, because and on the other hand, but we don't want to have this over polished perfection, technical perfection. So these are the two worlds we're sort of going in between, and we have to find our way. But my credo is to find a perfect musical idea which comes out from yourself as a musician. What you said, what you said, inspired by those early recordings, because they were, I have the feeling they were much more free than we are.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. I think one asks an awful lot of oneself, though, if perfection is one's aim. And maybe one can give oneself permission to be a bit less perfect in order to be a bit more effective. I don't know. If only the system would let us.
If I may add something to that, it would be already good if we are not carried by the system. Because nowadays, still, what we're doing in the conservatories is try to place people in jobs. There's a little bit of this sort of like preparation for professional life, and there's a little bit an obsession of how many of your students are already playing in that ensemble, in that orchestra, in that place, in that other place, and that is the kind of thing that we have inside our own institution. So just not being carried by that would be already an advancement. Then we have the whole to-do work, the whole homework that you just set for us, Professor.
Yes, I agree, and I think we have to discuss that in a broader context. So I've put in the chat that it's a very good and very important point for our discussions in Brussels and Bruges in the autumn with the REMA, because we will be together, conservatoires and agents, festivals, etc. I think it's very important point.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely. And what, because we are actually at the end of our wonderful, short and very inspiring discussion. And I think what you said then before, our chance, or if I would like to put a frame around that, it is our chance as early music performers to do exactly what you said, to actually get more to this ideas of music and our own performances. Because if you want to go into a modern orchestra, you have to play in a certain way. That I don't think we ever can change, but it's actually our duty and our chance to make something really special, something really individual, or to put some individual things, or a lot of individual things to that. I think that's what for me it comes down to. A last thing for Claire, yes?
Yeah, and about the activism. I think there are now young musicians who are refusing the normal way of getting on stage or making recordings, and who want to take the power on their products, on what they product. Well, I know some of them, and that's a sort of activism, I think.
Wonderful.
Very true. So if nobody, I mean, we have 1,000 questions and even more since the beginning of this evening, but we have to continue at another point with this, and it's important. Maybe we can find a whole meeting once more with that on that subject. But for now, I think we have to close this session. Thank you so much, Professor Daniel Leech-Wilkinson. Thank you so much to all of our team and all people who were there, who were discussing and listening. And yeah, and I hope to see you again with this kind of new ideas. Or and yeah, I see an applause from Hillary. Yeah, applause to Dan. Thank you so much. And all the best. Take care. Stay healthy. It's still important. And all the best. Have a nice evening.
Thank you so much. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. And thank you, Anton, for leading the discussion.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Pleasure. All the best. Bye-bye.